The key was warm, brass, tarnished at the edges with a flat head and a long shaft. The kind of key that opened something solid, something built before people worried about being subtle. It sat in her palm for a long moment before she slid it into the lock. The mechanism resisted, then gave way with a heavy click. Maya pressed her shoulder against the door. It swung open on hinges that had been waiting 3 years to complain. The smell hit her first. Not rot, not dust, not the cold emptiness of a place that had been forgotten. Lemon oil, old wood. Faintly, underneath everything, cumin and something sweet she couldn't name. The air inside was warmer than the November afternoon behind her. That made no sense. The building had been sealed. No power, no heat. No one had held a key except a lawyer 200 miles away who had never once visited. She stepped across the threshold. The floor was checkered tile, black and white, scrubbed clean. A long counter with 6 stools ran along the left wall, backed by a pass-through window into the kitchen. Booths with red vinyl seats lined the right side, their surfaces uncracked, the chrome trim gleaming dully in the light from the street. Every wall was covered, not with emptiness, not with the sad beige of abandonment. Photographs, handwritten notes, old menus in plastic sleeves, a yellowed newspaper clipping about a pie contest from 1972, a child's crayon drawing of a hamburger taped next to a framed black and white portrait of a woman with dark braids and tired eyes, and a smile that looked like it had survived things. Maya's breath stopped somewhere below her ribs, because the woman in the photograph had her face, the same cheekbones, the same way of holding her mouth when she wasn't performing happiness for anyone. The portrait sat above the cash register, centered, angled slightly downward as if watching over the room. Beneath it, someone had written in black marker on a piece of masking tape, "Mama Rose, 21-2000. Maya had never seen this woman's face before today. But the restaurant knew her. The walls knew her. Every photograph, every note, every yellowed receipt pinned to the corkboard by the kitchen door carried her handwriting, her recipes, her way of telling the world that food was how you said "I see you" without saying a word. On the wall behind the counter, where the staff would see at every shift, someone had taped a blank rectangle of brown craft paper. At the top, in the same handwriting as the recipe cards, someone had written, "This wall is for Maya's pictures." The ink had faded. The paper had yellowed at the corners. It had been waiting there for 18 years. Maya didn't cry. She wasn't there yet. She was still frozen in the doorway, still trying to understand how a building that had been locked for 3 years smelled like someone had just finished mopping the floors 30 minutes ago. But we need to go back to the beginning. Everything Maya owned fit inside a single black garbage bag and a backpack she'd found at a Goodwill for $3. The garbage bag held clothes, 4 t-shirts, 2 pairs of jeans that didn't fit right, a hoodie with a broken zipper, 3 pairs of socks, a toothbrush still in its pharmacy bag, and a small wooden box no bigger than her palm. The box held nothing except a cracked jade pendant on a leather cord. Her mother had been wearing it in the hospital. The nurses gave it to Maya afterward because no one else came to claim it. The backpack held a library card, a bus pass with $7 left on it, a flip phone with a cracked screen, and a spiral notebook with 73 pages of single-spaced handwriting. She'd started writing in it when she was 12, after her 3rd foster placement fell apart. The notebook never judged her. It never left in the middle of the night. It never looked at her like she was a problem someone else should have solved by now. She was 18 years and $41. That was the total. $41, a garbage bag, a backpack, and a jade pendant that might have been worth something if she'd been willing to sell the last thing her mother touched. The shelter on Wilkinson Boulevard had a 30-day limit. She'd been there for 23. The women on the bottom bunks talked in their sleep. The fluorescent lights never turned off completely, even at 2 in the morning, even when everyone was supposed to be resting. She'd learned to sleep with her arm hooked through the strap of her backpack because things disappeared in places like this. Things got borrowed without permission. Things got traded for things you didn't want to know about. She worked at a diner called The Sunrise, 6 days a week, 4 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, $2 an hour under the table plus tips, though the tips averaged maybe $8 on a good day because the customers were truckers and overnight stock clerks and people who counted their change before they left the counter. Maya washed dishes. She mopped floors. She learned to flip eggs without breaking the yolks because the cook, a man named Dennis who smoked menthols during every break, threw a spatula at her head the first time she messed up. She ducked. He laughed. She learned fast after that. The sunrise had a ceiling with acoustic tiles, the kind that soak up sound and turn everything gray. Maya counted them during slow hours. 126 tiles between her and the sky. She liked that number. It felt honest. 126 pieces of manufactured silence between her and a world that didn't seem to want her around. She'd aged out of the system on her birthday. No ceremony, no card, no caseworker with a sad smile, and a folder full of resources that led to dead ends. Just a letter that arrived at the group home 3 days later, informing her that her foster care benefits had terminated and she was now responsible for her own housing, medical care, and transportation. The group home gave her 72 hours to leave. She packed her garbage bag in 11 minutes. The library on North Tryon Street was the only place she could sit without being asked to buy something. She went there every afternoon after her shift ended, still smelling like bacon grease and industrial cleaner. The librarians knew her by sight. One of them, a woman named Karen with short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, had started setting aside books she thought Maya might like. Mysteries mostly. Sometimes travel memoirs about places Maya would never see. Karen never asked questions. She just slid the books across the counter with a small nod, like she understood that some people needed stories more than they needed conversation. On a Tuesday in late October, Maya was sitting in her usual chair by the window, reading a paperback about a woman who solved murders in a small English village when Karen appeared at her elbow. "You have mail." Maya looked up. "I don't get mail." Karen held out a legal-sized envelope, thick paper, a return address she didn't recognize, Cunningham and Associates, PA, Asheville, North Carolina. "It came to the shelter," Karen said. "The front desk signed for it. They asked me to give it to you." Maya took the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have. Inside, something solid shifted when she tilted it. She opened it with her finger because she didn't have a letter opener, didn't own a knife, didn't possess anything sharper than her own teeth. The paper inside was cream-colored, watermark visible at the edges, the kind of paper that cost more than she made in a week. She read the first line 3 times before it made sense. Estate of Rosalind Maria Delgado, deceased, Rosalind, not Rose. Her grandmother's full name, the one she'd never heard anyone use, the one her mother had whispered once when she was sick and feverish and not paying attention to who was listening. Dear Maya Delgado, pursuant to the last will and testament of the above-named decedent, you are hereby notified that you are the sole beneficiary of the real property located at 217 Old Mill Road, Swannanoa, North Carolina, together with all chattels, fixtures, and business assets contained therein. The property has been held in trust since October 12, 2004, pending your attainment of the age of 18 years. As you have now reached majority, the trust is hereby terminated and full title vests in your name effective immediately. Enclosed. Please find the key to the premises. You are advised to inspect the property at your earliest convenience. Maya turned the page. There was more. Legal language that swam in front of her eyes. A paragraph about property taxes being paid annually from a separate trust fund. A paragraph about utilities being maintained in standby status. A paragraph about how the decedent had amended her will 3 weeks before her death to include a specific provision for Maya's inheritance. And then, at the bottom, handwritten in black ink that had bled slightly into the paper, "Your mama's people are gone, but Rose's place was always yours. Come see it before you decide anything." The handwriting was small, precise, the handwriting of someone who had filled out forms for 40 years and still believed in doing things correctly. Maya sat in the library chair for a long time. The afternoon light shifted across the floor. The paperback slipped off her lap and landed spine up, the murder in the English village unsolved, unimportant. She had never met her grandmother. Her mother had never spoken about her family. Whenever Maya asked, her mother's face would close like a door, and she would say something vague about how the past was past, how some things didn't need digging up, how they had each other, and that was enough. Her mother had died when Maya was 4. Cancer that moved fast, that ate through her in 11 weeks, that left a 4-year-old standing in a hospital room with a cracked jade pendant in her fist, and no one to hold her hand. The foster system took her 2 days later. She'd spent 14 years believing she had no one, no grandparents, no aunts or uncles, no cousins, no last name that connected her to anything except a death certificate and a social worker's case number. And now this, a building, a restaurant, a property that had been waiting for her since before she could read, since before she understood what death meant, since before she learned to count ceiling tiles in a shelter that smelled like bleach and despair. The key was brass, warm in her palm. She looked at Karen, who was pretending not to watch from behind the circulation desk. "Is Asheville far?" Maya asked. "About 2 hours, maybe less if traffic's good." Maya looked down at the envelope, at the key, at the cracked screen of her flip phone showing the time, the date, the small blinking icon that meant she had no messages. She had $41. A Greyhound ticket to Asheville cost $37. She didn't decide so much as stop pretending there was a choice. The bus left Charlotte at 11:15 in the morning. Maya sat by the window, her garbage bag wedged between her feet, her backpack on her lap. The woman next to her was eating a hard-boiled egg from a plastic bag and reading a romance novel with a shirtless man on the cover. She didn't introduce herself. Maya appreciated that. The landscape changed as they drove west. Strip malls gave way to trees. The interstate narrowed. The sky opened up, wider and grayer, with clouds that looked like they were thinking about rain but hadn't committed yet. Asheville appeared gradually. First the highway signs, then the exits with names she didn't recognize. Then the mountains, blue and layered, disappearing into low cloud cover like they were keeping secrets. The bus station was small and smelled like coffee and exhaust. Maya gathered her things and walked outside, where the air was colder than Charlotte's, sharper, with a quality she hadn't experienced before. Mountain air, air that had traveled a long way to reach her lungs. She found a bench near the taxi stand and unfolded the letter again. 217 Old Mill Road, Swannanoa. She had no idea how far that was, no idea if buses ran there, if there were sidewalks, if she could walk it before dark. Her phone had 23% battery and no internet connection. A taxi pulled up. The driver, an older man with a gray beard and a John Deere cap, lowered his window. "Where are you headed?" "Swannanoa," Maya said. "Old Mill Road." "That's about 15 minutes. 10 if I take the back way." "I don't have much money." He looked at her garbage bag, at her backpack, at the envelope she was still holding like it might disappear if she relaxed her grip. "Tell you what," he said. "I'll take you for 10 if you don't mind the cab smelling like my lunch. Tuna sandwich. It's not for everyone." Maya got in. The cab smelled like tuna and old coffee and the pine-shaped air freshener dangling from the rearview mirror. The driver didn't talk. He just drove, winding through streets that got narrower and quieter the farther they went from downtown. They crossed a river, then a bridge that looked like it had been built before cars existed, then a road that turned to gravel, then dirt, then something that was barely a road at all, just 2 tire tracks worn into the grass. Old Mill Road didn't have street signs. It didn't have sidewalks or streetlights or any of the things Maya associated with places where people lived. It had trees. It had a creek she could hear but not see. It had houses set far back from the road, some of them well kept, some of them leaning like they were tired of standing up. The cab stopped in front of a building that didn't look like a restaurant at first glance. It looked like a house. A long, low building with a wraparound porch and a tin roof and windows that were dark but not dusty. The siding was white, though the paint was peeling in places. A wooden sign hung above the front door, faded but legible. Rose's Place, Eston 1952. Below the sign, someone had nailed a smaller piece of wood, newer than the sign, painted black with white letters, closed for renovation. Will see you soon. The paint was 3 years old. It should have been peeling. It should have been weathered and warped and sad. It wasn't. Maya paid the driver with trembling fingers. $10. 3 left in her pocket, plus the change she'd been saving for weeks, plus the 7 on her bus pass that wouldn't help her now. The driver handed her a card with a phone number. "If you need a ride back to the station, call that number. Ask for Earl." "Thank you." "Good luck, kid." He drove away. The sound of the engine faded into the trees. Then there was nothing except the creek she still couldn't see and the wind moving through branches and the small, precise sound of her own breathing. She walked up the porch steps. They didn't creak. They should have creaked. 3 years of rain and snow and freezing temperatures, and the wood felt solid under her sneakers. The key went into the lock. It fit perfectly. The door swung open. Maya stood in the threshold for a full minute, maybe longer. Her brain kept trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she should have been seeing, and the two things refused to match. A restaurant that had been closed for 3 years should smell like neglect, like mice and mold and the particular sadness of abandoned things. She'd been in enough empty buildings to know the smell. It had a weight to it, a presence, a way of settling into your clothes and your hair and your memory. This place smelled like lemon oil. She stepped inside. The floor was clean. The counter was clean. The booths had been wiped down recently enough that no dust had settled on the vinyl. The windows were dark because there was no power, but the glass was clear. No grime, no cobwebs, no buildup of 3 years of pollen and neglect. Someone had been here, not recently, not today, but someone had been maintaining this place, keeping it alive, coming in to dust and mop and polish while she was sleeping on a shelter cot 2 hours away, counting ceiling tiles, wondering if anyone in the world remembered she existed. Maya walked past the counter, past the booths, past the wall of photographs she hadn't fully processed yet. She pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen and stopped. The kitchen was small, efficient, a flat-top grill that had been scrubbed to bare metal, a 6-burner stove with copper pots hanging above it, a prep table with a butcher block surface scored with knife marks, each one a story she couldn't read, a walk-in cooler that hummed faintly, audibly, impossibly. The cooler shouldn't be running. The building had no power. She'd checked the light switches by the door. Nothing worked. Nothing should work. But the cooler was humming, a low, steady sound, like a heartbeat, like something that had been waiting. She pulled the handle. The heavy door opened on well-oiled hinges. Inside, the cooler was empty except for a single shelf. On the shelf sat a glass jar with a metal lid. The jar contained nothing. It was clean, empty, placed in the exact center of the shelf like an offering. Maya didn't understand it. She wouldn't understand it for a long time. But she closed the cooler door and stood in the kitchen with her garbage bag and her backpack and her cracked jade pendant, and she felt something she hadn't felt since she was 4 years old, since before her mother got sick, since before the hospital and the foster homes and the 126 acoustic tiles. She felt wanted, not in a way she could explain. Not in a way that made logical sense, but the evidence was everywhere. The clean floors, the polished chrome, the humming cooler, the wall with her name on it, waiting for her pictures, waiting for her to arrive and become part of a story that had been written before she was born. She walked back into the dining room and stood in front of the photograph of the woman with her face. Mama Rose, 1921 to 2004, her grandmother. A woman who had died when Maya was a baby, a woman her mother refused to discuss, a woman who had amended her will 3 weeks before her death to include a granddaughter she might never have met. Why? Why would a dying woman rewrite her will for a child she'd never held? Why would she leave a restaurant to a 4-year-old who couldn't possibly run it? Why would she arrange for the property to be held in trust for 14 years, for taxes to be paid annually, for utilities to be maintained, for someone to keep coming back to dust the booths and polish the chrome? Maya sat down in the nearest booth. The vinyl was cold through her jeans. The afternoon light had started to fade, filtering through the windows in long gold rectangles across the floor. She pulled the letter out again, read it more carefully this time. Past the legal language, past the paragraphs about trusts and chattels and properties, down to the handwritten note at the bottom. Your mama's people are gone, but Rose's place was always yours. Come see it before you decide anything. The handwriting, that small, precise, form-filling handwriting. Who had written that note? The lawyer? Someone else? Someone who knew Rose, who knew Maya's mother, who knew something about why a family would disappear from each other's lives and leave nothing behind except a restaurant and a key and a lifetime of questions? She looked up at the wall of photographs again. There was her grandmother's face. There were dozens of other faces she didn't recognize. Customers, probably. Staff. Friends. The people who had filled this room for 52 years, who had sat on these stools and eaten from these plates and left pieces of themselves behind in photographs her grandmother had pinned to the wall. And there, at the far end of the corkboard, half hidden behind a faded flyer for a church bake sale, was an envelope. Same cream color as the legal paper. Same watermark, no writing on the outside. Maya stood, walked to the corkboard, pulled the flyer aside. The envelope was tacked to the board with a single pushpin, placed there with care, angled slightly so it caught the light. She pulled the pin. The envelope came away in her hand. It wasn't sealed. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, covered on both sides with handwriting that was not the lawyer's. This handwriting was older, looser. The handwriting of someone who had written thousands of recipes, who had filled out order forms and payroll checks and birthday cards, who had learned to write before ballpoint pens existed and still preferred the scratch of a fountain pen on good paper. My dearest Maya, if you're reading this, you found my place. I knew you would. A grandmother knows. I can't explain it any better than that, so I won't try. You don't know me? I know that. Your mama made choices that kept you away from here, and I made choices that led her. I could tell you it was because I was respecting her wishes, but that's only half the truth. The other half is that I was scared of what she'd told me, scared of what I might find if I went looking, scared of loving someone I couldn't protect. She called me when you were 3 months old, your mama. She called from a payphone somewhere in South Carolina and told me she was fine, that you were fine, that she didn't need anything from me. And then she told me your father had left, that she was on her own, that she'd made a life for the two of you and didn't want me to interfere. I should have driven down there anyway. I should have found you. I should have held you and told you that you had a grandmother who loved you, even if she'd done a terrible job of showing it. But I didn't. And then she got sick. And by the time I found out, it was too late. Maya stopped reading. The paper trembled in her hands. The light had shifted again, gone darker, the gold rectangles fading to gray. She hadn't turned on any lights because there were no lights to turn on, no power, nothing except the humming cooler and the sound of her own heart and the words on this page. She kept reading. I had my lawyer find you. He told me you'd been placed in foster care, that no one had come forward to claim you, that the state was having trouble locating any living relatives. I could have fixed that. I could have called them and told them I was your grandmother, that you had a home, that you belonged somewhere. But your mama's phone call kept echoing in my head. She didn't want me to interfere. She'd made me promise, Maya, made me promise on her father's grave that I would stay away, that I would let her live her life, that I wouldn't come looking for you. I kept that promise for 14 years. Every day I regretted it. Every night I lay awake wondering if you were okay, if you were eating, if anyone was telling you that you mattered. The day I turned 70, I called my lawyer and told him to change my will. I told him to put everything in your name, to hold it until you turned 18, to make sure you had somewhere to go when the world stopped carrying you. I don't know if you'll want this place. I don't know if you'll want anything to do with a grandmother who waited too long and loved you from a distance and never had the courage to break a promise that should have been broken. But I want you to know something. This restaurant was my home. These walls raised me. These floors held me up when I couldn't hold myself. The people who came through that door were my family when blood family failed me, and they will be your family too if you let them. You don't have to stay. You don't have to cook or clean or learn any of my recipes. You don't have to be me. But if you want to, there's a blue binder in the office. It has everything I knew, every recipe, every trick, every mistake I made so you wouldn't have to make it yourself. The second shelf in the pantry. You'll know it when you see it. I love you. I know that doesn't mean much coming from a stranger, but it's true. I've loved you since the day your mama told me she was pregnant. I've loved you through every birthday I missed. I've loved you through the silence and the distance and the choices I can never take back. This place is yours now. What you do with it is up to you. But if you stay, if you open these doors again, I'll be here. Not in the way I should have been, not in the way you deserved, but here. In the walls, in the floors, in every pot and pan and recipe I left behind. Welcome home, Maya. Rose. Maya folded the letter. She folded it carefully, along the original creases, and slid it back into the envelope. Then she sat in the booth for a long time, watching the last of the daylight fade through the windows, listening to the cooler hum. She didn't cry. Not yet. But something in her chest had started to shift. Something that had been locked up tight for 14 years. Something she'd learned to ignore because ignoring it was easier than feeling it. Something that had been waiting for permission to exist again. She found the office behind the kitchen, A small room with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a wooden chair that creaked when she sat down. The window faced the creak she'd heard earlier, and in the fading light she could see water moving over rocks, steady and patient, the way water had been moving over those rocks for thousands of years. The pantry was off the kitchen, a narrow closet with shelves from floor to ceiling. Second shelf. She found it immediately. A blue 3-ring binder, thick, worn at the edges, the kind of binder that had been opened and closed 10,000 times. On the cover, in masking tape and marker, Rose's recipes, do not remove from kitchen. She pulled it down and opened it. The first page was handwritten, the same handwriting as the letter, but older, looser, more confident. A recipe for cornbread. Not the sweet kind, not the cake-like kind, but the kind you made in a cast-iron skillet with buttermilk and bacon grease and a patience that couldn't be rushed. This was my mama's recipe, Rose had written at the bottom, and her mama's before that. Now it's yours. Maya turned the page. Biscuits, gravy, fried chicken, collard greens cooked low and slow with a ham hock, black-eyed peas for New Year's, sweet potato pie, banana pudding with vanilla wafers and meringue that browned in the oven until it looked like clouds at sunset. Every recipe had notes in the margins, adjustments, warnings, small encouragements written in a hand that had gotten shakier over the years. Don't overmix the biscuits or they'll be tough. I learned this the hard way in 1967, and my customers let me hear about it. The secret to the gravy is patience. Let the roux get brown. Brown, not tan, not beige. Brown. If you burn the collards, just tell everyone it's caramelized. They'll believe you. Maya laughed. A small sound, unexpected, almost painful in her throat. She hadn't laughed in weeks, maybe months. She'd forgotten what it felt like. She turned another page and stopped. The handwriting changed here. Newer, sharper, a different pen, a different hand, someone who wrote with more pressure than Rose, someone who pressed down hard enough to leave grooves in the paper. Mama, I know you'll find this someday. I know you'll come looking. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person. I'm sorry for a lot of things. The baby's name is Maya. She has your eyes. She has your stubbornness already, I can tell. She's going to be something special, Mama. I don't know what yet, but something special. I wish I could be there to see it. I wish I could watch her grow up in your kitchen, learning your recipes, standing on a chair to reach the stove. I wish a lot of things, but I can't stay. You know why. You know what he did, what he said, what he would do if he found us. I can't take that risk, not with her, so I'm leaving. I'm taking her somewhere he'll never find us, and I'm not telling you where because if you don't know, you can't tell him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mama, but I need you to know something. If anything happens to me, if I can't be there to raise her, I need you to find her. I need you to take her home. I need you to teach her everything you taught me and everything I was too scared to learn. She deserves to know where she comes from. She deserves to know you. I love you, Mama. I've always loved you. I was just too scared to say it. Lydia. Maya read the page 3 times, her mother's handwriting. Her mother's voice, words her mother had written years ago, hidden in a recipe binder, left for Rose to find. But Rose had never found it. Or maybe she had. Maybe she'd read these words and still kept her distance, still kept her promise, still waited 14 years to reach for the granddaughter her daughter had begged her to protect. The dark secret wasn't a secret anymore. It was right here, pressed into paper, spelled out in her mother's handwriting and her grandmother's recipes. He. Someone named only by a pronoun, someone her mother had been running from, someone who would have found them if Rose had known where they were. Maya closed the binder. She sat in the darkening office with the creek whispering outside the window and the cooler humming in the kitchen and the weight of 3 generations pressing down on her chest. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what he'd done or why her mother had been so afraid. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her grandmother hadn't abandoned her out of cruelty. She'd abandoned her out of fear. Fear of breaking a promise. Fear of making things worse. Fear of loving someone she couldn't protect. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was an explanation. And explanations were more than Maya had ever had before. The knock came at 7:23 the next morning. Maya had slept in one of the booths, her garbage bag as a pillow, her backpack clutched to her chest like a child. She'd been too exhausted to feel the cold, too overwhelmed to care about comfort. She'd closed her eyes and fallen asleep to the sound of the creek in the cooler and the silence of a building that had been waiting for her. The knock was gentle. 3 soft raps on the front door, followed by a pause, followed by 3 more. Maya sat up slowly. Her neck ached. Her back ached. Her mouth tasted like sleep and fear and the faint ghost of lemon oil. The door opened before she could stand. An old man stepped inside. He was tall, stoop-shouldered, with skin the color of worn leather and hair that had once been black and was now white at the temples. He wore faded coveralls and work boots and a flannel shirt missing 2 buttons. In one hand, he carried a cardboard box. In the fourth other, a thermos. He stopped when he saw her. His eyes, brown and watery with age, widened slightly. Then they softened. "Well now," he said, "you look just like her." Maya didn't speak. She couldn't. The man set the box on the counter. He walked to the nearest booth and sat down across from her, moving slowly, the way people move when their joints have been doing this for 70 years and are starting to get tired. "Name's Harold," he said. "I worked for your grandmother for 32 years, started as a dishwasher when I was 17, ended up as her head cook. She taught me everything I know." He opened the thermos and poured coffee into the cup built into the lid. Black coffee, strong enough to smell from across the table. He slid it toward her. "She told me about you," Harold said. "Before she got sick, before she couldn't talk anymore, she made me promise to look after the place, to keep it clean, to make sure the pipes didn't freeze and the roof didn't leak and the cooler kept running." Maya wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. The warmth seeped into her fingers. "She knew you'd come," Harold continued. "She didn't know when, she didn't know how, but she knew. A grandmother knows. I can't explain it any better than that." He nodded toward the wall behind the counter, the brown craft paper with the faded writing. "She put that up the week after you were born. Said she wanted you to have a place for your pictures when you finally got here. Said she wanted you to know that this was always going to be your home, even if it took you a while to find it." Maya looked at the craft paper. At her name, written in her grandmother's hand, faded but legible. Waiting. "Did you know my mother?" she asked. Harold was quiet for a moment. He looked down at his hands, at the calluses and scars and knuckles swollen from decades of gripping knives and pots and the handles of cast-iron skillets. "I knew her," he said. "She worked here when she was in high school, waiting tables mostly. She was good at it, fast, funny. Customers loved her." He paused. "She was scared of something too. I never knew what, but I saw it in her eyes. The way she'd look over her shoulder when she walked to her car at night, the way she'd jump at loud noises, the way she stopped coming around after she turned 18. He looked up at Maya. "Your grandmother never stopped looking for her, never stopped hoping. And when she found out about you, when she found out she had a granddaughter out there somewhere, she cried for 3 days. I've never seen a woman cry that hard and keep on living." Maya took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter and hot and perfect. "She left you something else," Harold said. He pulled the cardboard box toward him and opened the flaps. "She left these for you too. Said to give them to you when you came. Said you'd know what to do with them." The box contained photographs, dozens of them. Black and white, color, Polaroids, professional portraits, snapshots taken with disposable cameras. All of them showed the same thing, this restaurant, this room, the people who had filled it over 5 decades. Harold reached into the box and pulled out a photograph. A young woman with dark braids and tired eyes, standing behind the counter, holding a pie. The woman from the portrait on the wall. Rose. "That's her," Harold said. "That's your grandmother. She was 42 in that picture. Just lost her husband. Just found out she was going to have to run this place on her own. She was terrified, but she didn't show it. She never showed it." He handed the photograph to Maya. "She was the strongest person I ever knew," he said. "And the loneliest, but she never let the loneliness win. She just kept cooking, kept serving, kept showing up every morning at 4 o'clock to light the stoves and roll out the biscuit dough. She said the work was what kept her alive. Said as long as she had something to do with her hands, she didn't have to think about everything she'd lost." Maya looked at the photograph, at her grandmother's face, at the pie in her hands, still warm, still steaming slightly, at the way Rose was looking at the camera, not smiling exactly, but not smiling either. "She wanted to teach you," Harold said quietly. "More than anything. She used to talk about it, about what she'd make first, about how she'd show you to hold a knife, how to tell when the oil was hot enough, how to know when the cornbread was done without setting a timer. She said food was your language, that she could tell from the way your mama had talked about you, from the letters she never sent, that food was how you were going to understand the world. He reached into the box again and pulled out a small envelope. This one was old, yellowed, addressed in handwriting Maya recognized from the recipe binder. For Maya, to be opened when she's ready to cook. I don't know what's in there, Harold said, but she made me promise to give it to you when you decided to stay, and I think you've decided to stay. Maya looked around the room, at the clean floors, at the polished chrome, at the wall of photographs and the empty space waiting for her pictures, at the kitchen beyond the swinging door where her grandmother's recipes waited in a blue binder and her mother's words waited on yellowed paper, and a cooler hummed with a heartbeat that had been keeping time for 3 years. She looked at Harold, at his tired eyes and his worn coveralls, and the way he was looking at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting, something he'd been waiting for almost as long as the building itself. I don't know how to cook, she said. Harold smiled. It was a small smile, tired and warm and full of years. Your grandmother didn't either, he said. Not at first. She learned, and so will you. He stood up slowly, bracing himself on the edge of the booth. Now, he said, you want to learn how to make cornbread? The cast iron skillet had been sitting on the stove for 32 years. Not literally, but close enough. Harold pulled it down from the rack above the prep table and set it on the flat-top grill, which he'd somehow gotten working despite the lack of power elsewhere in the building. Maya didn't understand it. She didn't ask. Some things, she was learning, didn't need to be understood. The secret, Harold said, is the pan. Got to be cast iron. Got to be seasoned. Your grandmother used this same pan every day for 40 years. The flavor's in the metal now. You couldn't wash it out if you tried. He handed her an apron. White cotton, stained with years of sauces and gravies, and the particular yellow of turmeric. The pocket had a name embroidered on it in red thread. Rose. Maya tied it around her waist. The apron was too big, the hem falling past her knees, but it felt right. It felt like armor. First thing, Harold said, you got to preheat the oven. 425 degrees. That's not a typo. 425. Your grandmother was very specific about this. Maya found the oven behind her. Old, commercial, the kind that could hold 6 sheet pans at once. She turned the dial. Somewhere inside, gas ignited with a soft whoomph. Good, Harold said. Now put the skillet in. Let it get hot while you mix the batter. He placed a bowl in front of her, a wooden spoon, measuring cups that had seen better decades. Cornmeal, he said. Not the mix, not the self-rising stuff in the yellow box. Real cornmeal. Your grandmother bought hers from a mill in the mountains. Same mill her mother bought from. Same mill her grandmother bought from. That mill's been grinding corn since before the Civil War. He handed her a bag, brown paper tied with twine. No label, no branding, just cornmeal that smelled like sunshine and earth and something older than both. Maya measured. 2 cups. She didn't know why 2 cups. She didn't know why anything. But Harold stood beside her, not touching, not correcting, just present, and somehow that was enough. Baking powder, he said. Salt, buttermilk, 1 egg, and bacon grease. He produced a coffee can from somewhere beneath the prep table. The can was dented, rusted at the seams, and full of something white and solid that smelled like smoke and pork and every breakfast she'd never had. Your grandmother saved every drop, Harold said. Never threw away bacon grease. Said it was wasteful. Said good cooks didn't waste anything. Maya scooped a spoonful of the grease into a measuring cup. It was solid at room temperature, pale and soft like butter. She added it to the bowl. Now mix, Harold said. Not too much, just until it comes together. If you overmix, the cornbread gets tough, and we don't serve tough cornbread. She mixed. The batter came together slowly, reluctantly, like it didn't trust her yet. She didn't blame it. She didn't trust herself either. The skillet should be hot now, Harold said. Take it out of the oven, put a little more grease in the bottom, swirl it around, then pour in the batter. Maya opened the oven. Heat hit her face. She pulled the skillet out with a towel, set it on the stovetop, added the grease. It sizzled immediately, bubbling and spitting, filling the kitchen with the smell of hot fat and anticipation. She poured the batter. It spread slowly, settling into the pan, filling the corners, rising slightly at the edges. "Back in the oven," Harold said. 20 minutes. Don't open the door. Don't peek. The oven knows what it's doing." Maya slid the skillet onto the rack and closed the door. They stood in silence. The oven hummed. The cooler hummed. Somewhere outside, the creek moved over stones, patient and eternal. "Your grandmother used to say that cornbread was the first thing she learned to cook," Harold said. "She was 6 years old. Her mother put her on a chair in front of the stove and showed her how to stir the batter without burning herself. She said it was the first time she felt useful, the first time she felt like she belonged to something bigger than herself." He looked at Maya. "She said cooking was the only way she knew how to love people. She wasn't good with words, wasn't good with hugs or tears or any of that, but she could feed you. She could put a plate in front of you and watch you take a bite and know, just by the look on your face, whether you were okay or not." Maya leaned against the prep table. The edge pressed into her lower back. The warmth from the oven seeped into her skin. "I don't know how to love people either," she said quietly. Harold nodded. "Then you're in the right place," he said, "because neither did she. But she learned. And so will you." The timer went off 20 minutes later. Maya pulled the skillet out of the oven. The cornbread was golden brown, cracked across the top, steam rising from the center in wisps that smelled like butter and heat and home. She didn't know how to describe it better than that. She didn't have the words. But standing there in her grandmother's apron, holding her grandmother's skillet, with a man who had loved her grandmother for 32 years standing beside her, she felt something she hadn't felt since she was 4 years old. She felt held, not by any person, not by any god, but by the space itself, by the walls that had witnessed 52 years of breakfasts and dinners and first dates and last goodbyes, by the floors that had been mopped and polished by someone who believed she was worth maintaining. Harold handed her a knife, a butter knife, nothing fancy, the same kind that had been setting tables at Rose's place since 1952. "Cut it," he said. "Right down the middle. See if it's done." She cut. The knife went through the crust with a soft crack. Steam poured out. The inside was golden, moist, studded with air pockets that caught the light. "It's done," she whispered. "It's done," Harold agreed. He pulled 2 plates from a stack beside the stove. They were white, heavy, chipped at the edges. The plates that had served thousands of meals to thousands of people, each chip a story, each crack a memory. He cut 2 squares of cornbread and placed one on each plate. "Now we eat," he said. They sat across from each other at the counter. The stools were cold. The chrome gleamed. The morning light was thin and pale, filtering through the windows, catching the dust motes that floated in the air like tiny stars. Maya picked up her cornbread. It was warm in her hands, almost too hot, the crust cracking slightly as she lifted it. She took a bite. The flavor hit her like a memory she'd never lived. Cornmeal and buttermilk and bacon grease and something else, something she couldn't name, something that tasted like patience and time and a woman she'd never met who had loved her anyway. Harold watched her chew. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Maya took another bite, and another, and another. Halfway through the piece, she started to cry, not the way she'd cried as a child, the loud sobbing of someone who didn't understand why the world kept hurting her. This was quieter. Harder, tears that slid down her cheeks without permission, without drama, without any sound at all. Harold didn't reach for her, didn't try to comfort her. He just sat there, eating his own cornbread, giving her the space to feel whatever she needed to feel. When she finished crying, she wiped her face with her sleeve. "Your grandmother used to say that everyone has 2 families," Harold said. "The one you're born into, and the one you choose, the one you build, the one that shows up for you even when they don't have to." He looked around the restaurant, at the booths and the counter and the wall of photographs, at the empty space waiting for Maya's pictures. "She built this place because she didn't have a family of her own," he said. "Not really. Her parents were gone, her husband died, her daughter left, but she had this. She had these walls and these floors and these pots and pans, and she had the people who walked through that door every day. They became her family. They chose her, and she chose them. He turned back to Maya. You can choose them too, or you can walk away. That's your right. That's your choice. Nobody's going to blame you either way. Maya looked down at her plate, at the crumbs of cornbread, at the streaks of butter melting into the ceramic. How do I choose? She asked. Harold smiled. That same small smile, tired and warm and full of years. You start by showing up tomorrow, he said, and the day after that, and the day after that. You wash the dishes and sweep the floors and learn to make the biscuits without burning them. You let the work change you. And one day you'll look up and realize you're not choosing anymore. You've already chosen. You've been chosen. And the only thing left to do is keep going. He stood up, picked up his plate, walked it to the sink. I'll be here tomorrow at 4 a.m, he said, if you want to learn how to make biscuits. He walked to the door, paused, looked back at her. She would have been so proud of you, Maya, your grandmother. She would have looked at you right now, eating her cornbread, wearing her apron, and she would have cried, not because she was sad, but because she was so goddamn happy that you finally came home. He opened the door and stepped out into the morning light. Maya sat at the counter for a long time after he left. The restaurant was quiet except for the cooler and the creak and the small sounds of a building settling into its bones. The photographs on the wall watched her. The empty space waited for her pictures. The blue binder sat on the prep table in the kitchen, her mother's words hidden inside, her grandmother's recipes waiting to be learned. She had $41 when she arrived. She had $3 now. She had a garbage bag of clothes and a backpack full of nothing and a cracked jade pendant that had belonged to a mother who had loved her enough to run. But she also had this. These walls, these floors, this counter, and these stools, and this skillet that had been seasoned with 40 years of patience and love and grief and hope. She had a name on a wall. She had a grandmother who had amended her will 3 weeks before she died to make sure a granddaughter she'd never met would have somewhere to go. She had a mother whose words were pressed into a recipe binder, hidden between cornbread and biscuits, waiting for someone to find them. She had Harold, and the cooler that hummed, and the creek that moved over stones, patient and eternal. She had a choice. Maya picked up her plate, walked it to the sink, rinsed it under cold water and set it in the drying rack. Then she walked to the corkboard behind the counter and unpinned the flyer for the church bake sale. She unpinned the yellowed newspaper clipping about the pie contest. She unpinned the child's crayon drawing of a hamburger, which she folded carefully and tucked into her pocket. She unpinned everything on that corkboard, every photograph, every note, every memory, and she laid them out on the counter in neat rows, sorting them by year, by season, by the faces she was beginning to recognize. Her grandmother's face appeared again and again. Younger, older, in the kitchen, behind the counter, at a table with a birthday cake, at a booth with a cup of coffee, and a smile that looked like it had seen everything and decided to keep going anyway. When she finished sorting, Maya looked at the empty corkboard. She looked at the brown craft paper with her name on it. She looked at the space where her pictures would go. She didn't know what she was going to do. She didn't know if she could run a restaurant, if she could learn to cook, if she could become the person her grandmother had believed she could be. But she knew one thing. She was still here. The sun had fully risen now. The light through the windows was golden, warm, filling the room with rectangles and diamonds and shapes that shifted as the morning aged. The dust motes danced. The cooler hummed. Maya walked to the front door and looked out. Old Mill Road stretched into the trees. Somewhere down that road, a town waited. People who would become her customers, her neighbors, her family. People who would walk through this door and sit on these stools and eat from these plates and leave pieces of themselves behind. She didn't know them yet, but she would. She closed the door, locked it, put the key in her pocket next to the crayon drawing. The restaurant was hers. Tomorrow she would learn to make biscuits. Tomorrow she would start choosing. But for now, she stood in the golden light of a November morning, wearing her grandmother's apron, holding a cracked jade pendant in her palm, and she let herself feel something she'd been afraid to feel for 14 years. She let herself feel like she belonged. 3 months later, Maya opened the doors of Rose's place for the first time in 3 years. She didn't have a grand opening, no ribbon cutting, no newspaper advertisement. She just turned the lock at 6 in the morning, flipped the sign from closed to open, and went back to the kitchen to pull a tray of biscuits out of the oven. Harold was already there. He'd been there since 4, showing her how to roll the dough, how to cut it without twisting the cutter, how to arrange the biscuits on the sheet so they'd rise evenly. The first customer arrived at 6:17, an older woman in a bathrobe and slippers, her gray hair in curlers, a newspaper tucked under her arm. She stood in the doorway for a moment, blinking at the lights, at the heat, at the smell of biscuits and gravy and coffee brewing in a pot that hadn't been used in 3 years. "Well," she said, "it's about damn time." She sat down at the counter. Maya poured her a cup of coffee. The woman wrapped her hands around the mug and breathed in the steam. "I'm Ethel," she said. "I've been eating breakfast at Rose's place since 1965. When they closed this place up, I thought I'd have to learn to cook for myself. And let me tell you, that was not going well." Maya laughed. It was easier now. The laughter came more naturally, less painful, less surprising. "What'll you have?" she asked. "Biscuits and gravy," Ethel said. "Same thing I've ordered every Tuesday and Thursday for 50 years. Don't mess it up." Maya didn't mess it up. She brought the plate to the counter and stood back while Ethel took her first bite. The older woman chewed slowly, thoughtfully, her eyes fixed on something in the middle distance. Then she looked at Maya. "You've got her touch," Ethel said. "Rose's. I didn't think anyone would ever have it again. But you've got it." Maya didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. She just poured more coffee and watched the morning light fill the room and listened to the sounds of a restaurant coming back to life. By noon, she'd served 23 customers. Some of them were old. People who remembered Rose, people who cried when they walked through the door and saw the photographs on the wall and the empty space that was no longer empty. Maya had filled it the night before. She'd pinned up her own photographs, pictures of the restaurant, pictures of Harold, pictures of the creek behind the building, the trees in winter, the first snowfall of the year. A picture of her mother's letter, the one hidden in the recipe binder, the words she'd never be able to say out loud. And in the center of the space, the biggest photograph she could print, a portrait of her grandmother. The same portrait that had been on the wall for 18 years, waiting. But now there were pictures around it. Her pictures, pictures that proved she had finally arrived. The dark secret wasn't solved. She still didn't know who he was, what he'd done, why her mother had been so afraid. She might never know. Some mysteries, she was learning, didn't have answers. Some wounds never fully closed. But the restaurant was open. The biscuits were rising, the cornbread was golden, and the coffee was hot, and the customers kept coming, one by one, filling the booths and the stools and the empty spaces in her heart. She was 18 years old. She had $3 in her pocket and a garbage bag full of clothes and a future she couldn't see. But she had this place, these walls, this family of strangers who had become something more. And every morning, when she turned the key in the lock and stepped into the kitchen and tied on her grandmother's apron, she heard the cooler humming, keeping time, waiting, saying, without words, in a language older than English, older than the mountains, older than anything she'd ever known, "Welcome home, welcome home, welcome home."